You see that we have a little recording menu down here in the bottom. So we are ready. Tell me, I think Dr. Blackburn contacted me and said you wanted to give this presentation. Maybe give us a little background on who you are and how you got here before we get started.
Yeah. So my name is Richie Roberts. I'm originally from Oklahoma. I'm just starting my first semester at Louisiana State University. I'm an assistant professor here. So just kind of getting started, getting my first couple of months here in Louisiana. So getting to meet everybody. I've enjoyed it so far. Some of my experiences: I was a high school ag teacher in Oklahoma for 4 years and had some success with SAEs and Proficiency awards. And I would just like to talk to you guys a little bit about that today. And so that kind of transitions and sets us up for what we're going to be talking about, I guess. So we can go ahead and get started if you're ready to, Dr. Smith.
Yep.
All right. Make sure we're in the right spot. There we go. So for our objectives today, we're just going to quickly review the different SAE types. There's currently 6 that are recognized by the National Council for Agricultural Education. And we're going to discuss just some of the goal-setting strategies that are available that will really help us ensure that our SAEs are high quality, which will also really lead into high-quality proficiency award applications if we're setting the groundwork appropriately. And then we're just going to discuss some final best practices about proficiency award applications and what those look like specifically. So the first type, probably the one that we're all the most familiar with in ag ed, is entrepreneurship. It's where the student actually owns, operates, and assumes all the associated financial risk of the agricultural enterprise. And just some examples would be if you own your own, livestock herd, if you own your own lawn care business or anything like that that would have an element of ownership would be classified as an entrepreneurship SAE. In terms of placement, that's really where our students are getting, some type of employment opportunities, whether that be paid or unpaid. And we really stress that it be in an agricultural setting. I know that's sometimes interpreted pretty broadly, and so it can encompass a lot of different elements of the ag industry. But just examples would be working maybe at a feed store, working for different livestock facilities. Here would be working for different crops and all different kinds of examples of jobs you could have that would be ag related. Some of the more newer SAE categories would be the exploratory. And that was just really developed to help introduce our students to different, ag careers, to different opportunities in terms of agricultural education, really promote agricultural literacy and awareness about careers. Examples of that would maybe just doing some brief research, general overview of what your SAE would be. You could maybe do a poster, maybe do some interviews, job shadowing. Those would be some examples of some exploratory SAEs. The other one would be research, and that would be where the student is actually responsible. Well, this is actually the wrong one. I apologize, but research is essentially where the student's going to be conducting and carrying out their own research project and making sure that they're able to answer some type of scientific question that's related to that. So it's a number of students that have done research type of SAEs that could be, had arranged do, SAE research on like honeybees, on different types of crops, looking at those. Also, in the ag mechanics field, just, testing out different types of beads and welds and that kind of stuff. So there's all different kinds of examples of research that you can do. School-based enterprises are all about the student managing an entrepreneurial operation in a school setting. So that may be where your student is in the greenhouse or in an ag mechanics field. You have some type of project that they're facilitating and then they're actually marketing that to their community. So there's a lot of examples of that, and we can see that happening. But kind of the key here with this particular SAE type is the student needs to take accurate records and make sure they're maintaining those records in a way that's showing growth for them in terms of their SAE project. And then this is actually the service learning one, where the student's responsible for managing a service activity that is tied to an agricultural education curriculum, developing a needs assessment, goals, budget, and more. And so that's really where we think about giving back to our community, but it always has to have that curriculum tied to ag ed, so something that they're learning in their coursework that they're able to apply through some type of project. That maybe they're, growing crops and then donating part of the crop to the needy, or maybe that's actually going out in their community and developing for their community a park or something using their ag mechanics skills. So there's all different types of examples of ways we can give back to our community through service to really make that work. So those are the 6 SAE types. And some of those are newer that are recognized by the Ag Ed Council nationally. The ones we traditionally recognize are more the entrepreneurship and placement. That's typically how most individuals would go about getting like their American FFA degree. So they're going to have to earn some type of money and be able to demonstrate that through records. And it is possible to get your American degree through unpaid hours, but it obviously is going to take a lot of extra work and documentation to make that happen. And so kind of the basics of having a quality SAE is being able to evaluate your SAEs. And that's how we can really set up our students for success and say, are they doing a good job, or do we need to make some improvements in certain areas? And then how do we continue to grow in this particular area? And so this is just from one of our Ag Ed textbooks, and they talk about just the reasons why evaluating SAEs are important, and I definitely agree and promote these as well. Really just about helping students self-evaluate and make adjustments in terms of their SAEPs, so their supervised agricultural experience programs. Also just to ensure that students are on the right track. It's, they want to know, am I doing a good job? What can I do better? So it just helps them, stay on the right course in terms of their SAE. And then you can better evaluate your own roles in helping students conduct their SAEs. So you can understand what it is that you need to do in terms of support to help them get where they need to be in terms of their SAE. You can obviously identify strengths and weaknesses through evaluation. And probably the most important thing that we overlook in terms of evaluation of SAEs is that we can help our students make connections between their coursework and the theories and concepts we discuss in class, between that and their SAE project. So it can be a really powerful connection if they can see it being played out in the real world. And so that can really be a way that we can bring those elements together. So who should be evaluating our SAEs? And it really is kind of a team approach that needs to be making that happen. It should be the teacher. Obviously, they need to be involved in it, but also our students need to be involved in their own evaluation. They need to do self-reflection and think about, have I done everything that I need to do in terms of my SAE to make it successful? Also, potentially employers, employees could even play into that as well. Other individuals that might be relevant would be something definitely to consider. So we need to take a more holistic approach of evaluating SAEs if possible. And I know it's sometimes hard to get that feedback as best we can, but hopefully through new kind of advancements, Google Forms, that kind of stuff, you can send out some forms to people and questionnaires and try to get some feedback on your students as best as possible. So what are the criteria that we should be assessed? What should we be looking at in terms of quality SAEs? And we should think about the quality of planning. Do they have a high quality plan in place in terms of their SAE? What their objectives, their purpose, their goals are, and then how do they make those continue to advance? How do we progress and grow in terms of our SAE? Are we keeping accurate records? Are we developing in terms of our skill advancement and goals achievement? Are we meeting our goals? Are we exceeding our goals, or are we not? And if we're not, then we definitely need to reevaluate some of those. And also the student learning that's happening. That should always be kind of the key piece of what's happening and what's going on is the student learning piece. And what are we progressing, and is it just the same thing every day or not? One SAE hack I want to talk about here is just, and I know you probably have heard this before, but it was a great way to really keep an evaluation system going with my students, and that was just have them submit 3 or 4 action-oriented photos and reflections every 9 weeks. And so the school where I taught high school was on a 9-week system, and so we had to submit grades every 9 weeks, and so that was just a good point for us to have our students bring photos. During my time teaching, we kind of transitioned to AET, and so they were able to start submitting them more online, and so that's a good option as well. They can do reflections online, submit photos online, and keep those in kind of one place. But you can also do it if you don't have AET in your program. You can have them physically submit photos and keep track of those, or email those photos to you. So whatever method works for you, but that's really a way to collect high quality action photos, and then also have students reflecting on those photos can make them think more deeply, and then help you kind of understand where it is that they're in where they are in their program, and are they making the advancements that's needing to be successful in SAE. One element that I think when I talk to a lot of ag teachers maybe isn't happening, just across the United States, is just SAE rubrics, and how are we assessing student learning through SAEs. And I think the rubrics that are available through AET are definitely beneficial for us in terms of helping us understand how to begin to assign grades in terms of SAEs, because they should be a graded component of every class, is making sure that students have an SAE and incorporating that as much as possible. But specific rubrics should be designed based on the 6 SAE types. And we should be thinking about how to formatively assess our students' SAEs. So how do we think about SAEs every month? That's typically how often I assigned a grade for my students in terms of their SAEs monthly. And maybe I wasn't actually physically seeing that SAE every month, but I was at least having a conversation about progress that was happening every month with SAEs. My goal was to make at least 2 formal visits every semester for my SAEs, and some of those were in a school-based program, were more school-based enterprise SAEs, and so they were easy to do. But that was my goal every year, is to do 2 per semester, and I think that's something that can definitely be achievable if we make that a priority in our programs. And also, we need to summatively assess our students. So are we assessing them annually on growth and looking big picture what's happening? There should be some way to really think about big picture, that yearly, annual outcome of what's happening. And sometimes if they're more production-oriented SAEs, maybe you're going to have a loss, maybe you have a drought, or maybe you have an overabundance of rain, you have a flood and you lose crops or you lose animals or whatever. And it's fine if that happens, but you need to be sure and document that appropriately, and then discuss, what happened and what you learned from that experience. And like I already mentioned, there are rubrics available through AET. They're kind of general and vague and basic, but there's something that you can begin to work through and work on as you kind of develop your own system. So how do we ensure that our students' SAEs have a quality foundation? We want to make sure that our students are really, these SAEs that we're developing, how do we make sure that they're just solid from the beginning? I think the answer to that is really through goal setting. And so when you first get students in your programs, you have to make sure that you're setting goals and making sure that they understand the value of quality SAE programs. And so I want to stress SMART goals. And so SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-oriented. So when we talk about specific, they lay out exactly what it is that you want to achieve. In terms of measurable, that's using some type of quantifiable information that you can look back on and see, did we meet this or not? Are we achieving this or not? And then also attainable and realistic, those kind of go hand in hand a little bit together. Is it something that we can actually do and carry out? Is it realistic to our program and our project? Maybe we need to explain that and give some more understanding to that as we move forward. But also time-oriented. You always need to put some type of time stamp on your goal so that you know how long it is that you're going to give yourself to be able to achieve that particular feat in your program. So SMART goals are very, very important, and those should be some things that you should evaluate yearly. So when a student first begins their program, they need to set 2 or 3 SMART goals for how they want to lay the foundation of their SAE and how they want to continue to grow and make that project really work for them. And then I typically would reevaluate those yearly and try to reorient my students to what they need to be achieving in the year to come. So I want to go through some examples. The first example is for a landscape business, how a student would maybe set a goal. And this may be, the example 1 may be a goal that a typical high school student may use. So grow my landscape business. So they want to make their landscape business bigger. And that's a good, general goal to kind of have. But when we think about it through SMART goals, or they need to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-oriented, maybe example 2 may be kind of where we want to push them. it's not super long, but it's a lot more specific, I think, if you think and really drill down on it. So this is going to be expand greener pastures landscaping, and that's just the fake name I gave to this particular company. So expand greener pastures landscaping clientele by 10% using social media in 2018. And so you can see I used the actual name. I used an action-oriented verb to begin the actual goal. I actually set some type of physical number, so I had some type of way to really evaluate whether I was successful or not, so this 10%. I also gave the specifics of how I'm going to grow and make this happen, and that's through social media. And so that was how it was being realistic in terms of the goal setting. And then it was also time-oriented because it gave the 2018 setting. So that's a very short, compact goal, but it still meets all the requirements for being smart. And I think if you compare the example 1 and example 2, you're going to have a lot better understanding of what you need to do to be able to achieve your goals versus just grow my landscape business when we compare that to expand greener pastures landscaping clientele by 10% using social media in 2018. So that's a lot more clear, concise, and just a really robust type of goal that we can really achieve. And so when we think about our goals and how we report those, and this is kind of getting into proficiency awards a little bit, you have to show your original goals, and then you have to show how you met or exceeded or didn't meet those goals in your write-up portion. And it's a really important component of that. And so to be able to really maximize your points, not only for proficiency awards, but just in general to really show impact of your SAEs, it needs to be written up in a way that can really demonstrate that. And so I go back to my SMART goal philosophy. So from January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018, that's that time specific. Greener pastures landscaping. I'm being very specific here who the actual person is that I'm talking about. Posted 132 social media advertisements. So this is, again, being very, very specific, giving quantifiable information through Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. So I provided the information on the mediums that were used in terms of social media to make that happen, yielding a net of 6,212 social interactions. As a result, our clientele expanded from 7 to 18 customers. So we automatically see up here where we exceeded this goal, and then we describe kind of the methods or methodology around how we actually made that happen. And so you see there's a lot of quantitative information there, a lot of numbers there, so that we can specifically show how we met that goal. And this is just an example that I created, and so it's not actually like a real one. But this would be an example of the type of data that you would need to collect in terms of your SAEs. You need to keep very fine records. And social media documents itself if you're running a page. And so you can get all this social interaction information to make that happen. And then you're just keeping track of your customers. And so this is a realistic goal because 10% is pretty easy to achieve. If we would have said 90% over 100%, that may have been a little harder to achieve. And so we always want it to be as realistic as possible. This is how we show our impact here is all in the write-up. And it's really about being as specific, concise, but detailed as possible when we're writing that up. And so that's just, sorry, I went back a few times. So those are some examples of some SMART goals. Why, when we compare the two, it's a lot more clear. It's easier to write up and demonstrate successes through this impact statement that we're going to write. And those are really important for Proficiency Awards applications. So in general, though, SAEs, so we can think about record keeping and making sure that our students are being successful in terms of their goal setting and their SAEs. But research really tells us that we have to have the motivation to make this happen. And so Rubenstein and Thoron really told us that all participants, the FFA participation through SAE-based awards extended the classroom and award program provided motivation for some learners to further SAE. So we realized that these SAE-based awards really makes some of our students more motivated. And so we have to use that as a motivation. And so that's a good reason to do proficiency awards because they really emphasize, this excellence in SAEs. And if we want them to really make all these set these goals, achieve these goals, continue to expand their program, they have to be motivated by something, and sometimes these proficiency award applications are ways to make that happen. Proficiency awards mainly focus on placement, entrepreneurship, and research categories. However, the other categories like service learning, school-based enterprise, any of those could really be, you may have to retarget and kind of retool it for an entrepreneurship replacement, but you can typically make those work. They may not be as competitive as a traditional placement or entrepreneurship, but I think it still should be encouraged in our programs and award structures to really recognize those different areas. So don't be afraid if it doesn't fit into one of those. But proficiency awards are usually recognized at the local level, so a lot of local chapters will recognize their local proficiency award winners. And then we're familiar with our state level and then national level. And nationally, proficiency awards are really competitive. They take a lot of planning, a lot of work and editing to really make sure that they're going to be successful and that our students that have really put in the work are being recognized. To just realize the different levels of recognition that you can provide students. These are just some general tips on how to be successful with award applications. And those are follow the instructions, first of all. You have to really read the instructions, make sure you understand them. You can't alter the application in any way or it will be disqualified. Now that we have AET, it's a lot harder to actually modify the applications and make up huge modifications. But back when I first started teaching ag, they were in an Excel form still. Traditionally, that's how most people fill them out, and so it was easy to copy them over and paste them and that kind of stuff. And it got some ag teachers in trouble because they weren't in the original format they were supposed to be. So don't copy and paste it over into a Word document. Now you can copy and paste it into a Word document, to check for spelling, that kind of stuff. But don't leave it in that format. You have to copy and paste it back over to that application. You can't change the font size. It has to be the font size they specify. So make sure that it's the exact instructions that are actually provided there on the actual application. And make sure you're using the latest revised application form on the AET website or the National FFA Organization website. You don't want to use an old application and resubmit it because it may not have all the actual specific things that you're going to need. So make sure it's the most revised application. And then confirm your application deadline. You don't want to turn it in late or you're going to be disregarded. You're not going to be able to get recognized for all the hard work that your students have been putting in. Also, neatness makes a really big impression. And so you want to make sure that everything just appears really neat. Your photos don't appear grainy or blurry. You just want to make sure you use good grammar, spelling. You don't have any big mathematical errors, that all of your calculations make sense and are organized in a way that you can follow it really easily. So when you're judging, and I've judged at the national level several times, I've had national finalists multiple times, it's really important, that neatness and making sure that the presentation of the application is really high quality. You have to really make sure that that's of highest importance. Also, the application is a series, just in general, questions about their SAE. Some of the questions are really easy. Some of it's just about background information. Obviously, you're going to have to list the goals, the major goals you had for your proficiency award. You're going to address those. You're going to have to tell some results. So some of them require some more thoughtful consideration. And it takes really years of planning to be able to get to the level to where they need to be recognized at the national level. So you have to start them off at the 8th and 9th grade year, and sometimes it can be a little bit later than that, and they can still get recognized. But typically it's not just going to be a one-year program that's going to be recognized as a national winner. I'm not saying that hasn't ever happened before, but typically it's going to need multiple years and to just show scope and growth of the actual SAE program to really be successful. And all the information ends for this year, it would be December 31st, 2018. So you wouldn't report on any information from 2019 when you actually fill out the application and submit those for the following year. So always end at the year that you're submitting the back year. So the year's already finished when you're submitting this information at the national level. So don't ever include those 3 or 4 months, 4 or 5 months actually, that would go into the national application. So make sure that you're ending everything that December 31st of that previous year. For placement applications, only put jobs, hours, and wages that are part of the specific award area. So don't include, any hours or jobs that don't pertain to the actual application. I've actually seen that happen multiple times at the national level where they have, they're filling out for a specific award area, and then they have additional stuff on there that doesn't even tie to your actual project. And so you want to make sure that it's only the relevant information that's actually included on that Proficiency Award application for this particular project. So don't include in all the other stuff. You may have multiple enterprises, multiple SAEs, multiple jobs, but only the things that are going to specifically relate to that SAE need to be included. You remove the rest of the information. Consider listing 3 or more specific jobs, responsibilities unique to each enterprise. So for the enterprise that you're actually doing, so 3 or more specific jobs, responsibilities, and kind of show that over a years, like how those responsibilities have grown, evolved. You want to show advancement in not only the scope and size of your SAE, but also the knowledge and the skills that you possess, or that your students possess when they're going through these SAE projects. Each year, add to or change the job's responsibilities to show growth learning within your SAE. So make sure that you're showing new skills. You don't want to show just the same skills over a 4-year time span. That's really not what we're wanting in terms of our SAE programs. And so you want to make sure that that's happening. I'm in a presentation, but I can get it later. Thank you. For entrepreneurship tips, only use projects that are part of this specific award area. Again, just like placement, so you don't want to include, if you're doing livestock production and that's the Proficiency Award you're filling out for, you don't want to include something about crop production or any type of plants or any of that information. Be sure any non-crop expenses, barters or transfers match your expenses instead of income. So all of those things, those non-cash expenses, bartering, transfers, anything like that, and that happens a lot when you're dealing with students that maybe are borrowing their parents' property or their parents' materials for something, or they're bartering for for feed for their animals or something like that. And that goes under that does not go under your income. You need to report that as an expense. And that's a big mistake that I see a lot at the national level when people fill in from different states, is that they want to report that as an income when it's not actually an income. It's an expense that we need to include and think about. So don't make that mistake. In terms of your photos, you want to make sure that you're taking photos throughout the year. Like I said, on the SAE hack I gave you earlier, make them submit 2 or 3 photos every 9 weeks. Make it part of their grade. Make them grade on that. They have to submit that through AET or through email or something, so that you can start keeping a log of those different pictures and action-oriented photos that you would actually have. Make sure you're changing the shirts and caps for the students. You don't want the same clothes in every other application. There are some exceptions to that. So I had a student that worked in like a laboratory setting for a research SAE, and she always had a lab coat on, and that was fine because in her job that she was working on, she had to have a lab coat on. That was part of the appropriate PPE that she would have to wear in that particular instance. And so if that's, you don't want to break PPE just to get different clothes or something in your photos. So don't make that mistake. So if it's a job where you need certain clothing, then that's just what has to happen. So when possible, use caps, jackets with an FFA logo. Your local program is always good. You want pictures that show close up. You want to see their face. You can have some distant shot if it makes sense, but try to have as much close-up, action-oriented photos as possible. And you also want to really minimize those staged photos. So as many action-oriented, actually doing some type of skill, and it would prefer to be a really high, order skill, not something that would be really easy for anybody to do. Is what the kind of pictures that you want. So something that's going to really demonstrate the skill set to that particular student. In your photo captions, just some general tips. You don't need to say, in this photo of me, or here I am in this photo. The judges know that the photo is of that particular student. It's their application. And so you want to be more creative with how you approach those captions. And so I always try to start off with some type of, action-oriented captions. Some type of verb is always a good way to think about captions. So an example would be pruning shrubs will increase whatever. So don't just say, this is a photo of me doing this. Really try to demonstrate your knowledge, understand that the judges know that that's you in the photo, and that doesn't have to be described every single time. You should also include facts, appropriate terminology, and be as quantifiable as possible when you're writing these captions. So not only in your goals and your write-up of your evaluation that you need to report, like numbers and that type of stuff, but also in your captions, you need to be as quantifiable as possible. So you need to demonstrate your success in terms of your skill set, and that if you can quantify that, that's better if possible. Also in photos, to not show unsafe facilities or practices in photos. So an example would be not wearing safety goggles while repairing equipment. So anything like that that's going to show any type of hazardous condition. You need to be inappropriate, any type of, have all the safety gear that you need on, or you're going to get disqualified automatically from the actual competition. So you always have to have that covered. So these are just some general photo captions tips. So you want to have a high quality picture showing involvement in the activity. So you want to have some type of action going on, if at all possible. Be interesting and informative. Don't repeat photos within the application. You must fit in within that particular box. You can't make a bigger photo than the actual size that's recommended. You have to have Arial font 14 and maximum of 8 lines. You just have to remember that that's the maximum amount of lines you can actually print in the application. So I would print the photo caption pages in the photos to see how they're going to look when you print them off, because they will be printed off for the judges. And so you wanted to see what that's going to look like. And if it's cutting something off, then you're going to have to go back and edit that and make that look as good as possible. This is just kind of a quick caption here that's created. Maybe show you some examples of how to begin to think about a caption. So in 2017, I raised 1,921 bedding plants from plugs and donated them to my local FFA chapter for fundraising purposes. To accomplish this, I mixed the growing medium, transplanted and manipulated the greenhouse environment based on each crop's growing needs. So in this particular caption, this is being quantifiable. You're giving dates and information. You're explaining what's going on, but you're not saying, in this photo, I am doing this specifically, because that's that's understood. But it's also showing that you know the terminology, that you know why you're doing this, given the background information. And so it's just really helping you kind of demonstrate the skill sets that you have, and you know how to make those things happen. Now, this is a very important piece that maybe is overlooked sometimes, is your skills and competencies. So this is a very important page in the evaluation of the application. Counts for about 25% of the points when you get down to it. And so you need to really think through those skills and competencies that you're trying to build and demonstrate in your actual application. Be very detailed in explaining the contributions to success. This is when you want to really demonstrate your specific terminology that would be specific and beneficial, or that would be specific to the industry that you're working in. So all that terminology is really important when you're using that. Again, use measurable impacts, use numbers, use quantifiable information when at all possible. It's not always possible to do that when you're talking about skills and competencies, but hopefully we can talk about growth in terms of years and what happened, kind of in a successive manner. Also relate to accomplishments and growth as much as possible. Another important piece is maybe something that we don't think about because we're spending so much time on the rest of the application that we kind of just throw together a personal page, but it's also one of the most important pieces. When you're judging at the national level, I often see a lot of judges, they'll skip through the whole application and go straight to the pictures pages and the personal page and look through those first. And they'll kind of get a feel for the application. So these are one of the first things that they're going to actually see typically is there at the back. And so the personal page is really used to enhance your application and, highlight something different about your SAE and activities. A popular way that I've seen to do this is to use 3 to 4 new pictures with captions that detail different phases of your SAE that were highlighted in your caption photos. So you're going to have your initial photos that you have in your application, but then you can have 3 or 4 more that you fit into your personal page and then include more captions. And so you can show just a greater scope of your SAE and show more more of the different skill sets and successes that you've had in that personal page. Another good option would to be, if you have a flyer for your business or your, SAE, whatever it would be, and that I've seen that be presented as a personal page, and that can be really effective for, getting across to the point of how you market your business. I've seen some examples of people, just different marketing media, maybe social media posts they'll compile together and put on that personal page just to really show all the different ways they're being successful marketing their business, getting the word out about what they're doing. And so those are all good strategies to think about in terms of really enhancing that personal page. So remember that that's kind of a big piece of what the judges will be looking at, those pictures and the personal page. So just some final tips, last things to think about. Have an additional people check for spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Triple check for that information types into the application is not cut off when the application is printed. That's happened to me many times, so I think I've got it all set, and then I print it off, and it's not, all showing on the application. I've got some lines that are being hidden, and so you have to go back and figure out what's cutting out all those lines, and so make sure that it's just looking very professional. Watch the maximum amount of characters that you're using. So some of those boxes in the AET system, when you're actually typing the application, have character maxes, and you have to be very careful of not exceeding that, or all your text won't show up in the actual boxes. And so you just have to make sure that you're being aware of that. Also be sure that all signatures are present. So everybody that needs to sign has to sign off on the application. And then you also, all your checklist at the end of the application has to show met. So if you have an error showing up in red at the last checklist page, then it's probably not going to be considered. It's probably going to get kicked to the side in terms of being considered for an award for this particular application. So I just want to open it up and see. I know we got at least one person on the line. Is there any questions that you want me to go through in terms of application specifics? That's just kind of a big, broad overview of SAEs, SMART goal planning, and then Proficiency Award tips and tricks.
Richie, I have a question. So talk to me about timing. I know an SAE is a year-round event, but you mentioned kids turning in pictures every semester. Is that sort of reverse engineering the application? Start with the fun stuff and build your way into actually filling out all the other pages of the Proficiency Award application. Do you have any tips on timing the actual application? Because our state contest and Proficiency Award deadlines are awful close usually, and it's really hard to do both.
Yeah.
Some tips on timing may help a young teacher
plan
better going into this year.
So my students would always, we close those applications out December 31st, but typically we're already working on the actual application. The record books closed for December 31st. The application that is already started for my students, we typically start in the fall semester. Usually after National Convention is kind of when we kicked it into high gear. Between then and Christmas is when we got most of our writing and that kind of stuff done. But like they've been collecting pictures for years, like I talked about. So that was part of my grade every 9 weeks. So typically we had 6 new pictures, and they were all action oriented, and they couldn't have been a skill that they had already taken a picture of before, unless it was a higher quality photo of that particular skill, or it had been several years since they had submitted it. So they're submitting about 6 pictures a semester, writing reflections on those pictures. And so that's how I really assessed their SAE. And when I was an ag teacher, it was part of the grade for my class. So every student had to do it, no matter if they were just had a school-based enterprise where maybe they were working in the greenhouse and selling and marketing for our greenhouse, plant sale or something like that. They still had to make sure they're taking pictures and demonstrating skill set increases. And so that was a big push in my program, and just a big part of their grade was making sure that happened. But so all those photos were being collected. We had the reflections that, kind of would be pretty easy to change into like a caption, for that particular photo already. We already remembered what had happened. Maybe we needed to go back and, enhance those a little bit and make sure that they're quantifiable, that they are, showing, all those skill sets that we're wanting to weave throughout the project. But like I said, a lot of the writing on those happened after National Convention and up to Christmas. And then we kind of, fine tuned them because, competition season started in Oklahoma where I was, in the next semester. And so it was kind of crazy. So I always kind of front loaded those particular, activities, made sure that those were happening. So, yeah.
What time of year was the review day for Proficiency Awards?
So in Oklahoma, they're in February. So the applications are due February 15th every year. And then they get recognized on stage in April, the end of April for state convention. And then you have time that summer to go back and make corrections based on the suggestions when they get reviewed to the state level.
I know you mentioned AET several times, but talk to me about record books. Do you have any tips on effective record books or systems other than AET? We have folks that use AET and do it well, but we have some folks that still don't. You got any help?
Yes,
with those?
in Oklahoma.
And also, in Oklahoma, did you guys turn in record books with your Proficiency Award applications, or at least with the star farmers?
Right. Yeah. So that was part of the process. When I started off, we didn't use AET in Oklahoma, but by that time I ended, we had transitioned to AET. So I was kind of in that weird place where I did both. So we had an Excel application that we used, and I think it's still floating around and exists somewhere to where it was actually a record book that was through Excel that we kept. And kind of my philosophy is they had one Excel record book that they maintained every year. And then those were typically updated on Fridays in my program every week. So typically Fridays we had about 20 minutes of record book updates every single week. That was just a priority for me. SAEs were really big in my program, and so every single week we were thinking about record keeping and making 20 minutes. Sometimes it wasn't a full 20 minutes depending on the class, but so every week that was a priority for us. That was the record keeping time that we set aside. And made that a priority. But so I did do that through Excel. I did that through AET. So I did both and kind of used the same philosophy of just making sure those records were updated every single week. And then we were required to report what we call our final all day numbers. That was typically, so every student that, keeps records, which should be every single student in your program, we were able to, we had to go back and report numbers every single year for that student in Oklahoma. And then now they do that. They just automatically upload those from AET, and that is how they actually get those numbers now. But when I was an acting teacher, I had to do that by hand initially, and it took a lot of time and a lot of preparation to do that. And then for the actual state level, they don't actually check the record books. But for the state STAR system, they do review those in terms of you have to bring your record books to the actual selection process, that kind of stuff. And they're actually the state STARs are selected